I'm raising a African American daughter. She needs role models. She needs to know the history of the struggles of African American women, and to know that Phillis Wheatley was a member of this church, what she's a member of this church, to, to know that she can overcome various obstacles and hurdles in her life means a lot to me when I'm talking to my daughter about strong Black women.
Phillis Wheatley is the first published African-American woman author.
She was a young woman who had been taken from her country and brought into slavery.
She was Black, she was foreign born, she was a slave. Despite her circumstances, she took what was offered to her and developed herself. She, Phillis, couldn't predict what would happen because of her education. She just took advantage of it and became this just simply outstanding role model for the rest of us. When we think about African American culture is very steeped in religion and faith and belief in God. And I believe that's the case because Phillis Wheatley, as an example, God is all that we had once upon a time. If you didn't have faith in God, if you didn't have God to turn to, hopelessness, despair was all that you had to live on. And that is not a life.
The bit of work that I have read or have heard in her poetry talks about the Bible stories, and she places them in her understanding as a woman who is dealing with oppression. So she figures out a way to share her story and to use her voice and to lift it up strong. And I'm just always so amazed about her resiliency and what was that spark and spirit in her. And I think it was God.
I'm so happy that she discovered that internal talent, that internal blessing from God, to the extent that she could show people who owned her and people who had very low expectations of her, that she was what all of us are, human beings.
She writes with passion to talk about what this means to be an African slave in a country that professes Christianity.
Many people of color were embarrassed by the fact that she was a slave. And that shocked me in terms of being able to celebrate her. I do not consider my group history as it relates to slavery as an embarrassment. It is a point of pride for me, as a matter of fact, because it speaks to what we endured and what we lived through, and in many ways what we overcame. So Phillis Wheatley represents all of that to me as a point of pride.
Phillis went far, and she even had famous people fighting for her because she did write those poems, but nobody wanted to believe it.
People that would examine her to make sure that these were her writings. And so she was tested. I mean, obviously they didn't believe her.
They're not smart enough to do that kind of stuff. Well, no. How did she know how to write poetry? Somebody else had to write this. But she proved them wrong.
It is the way in which we're treated and the way in which opportunities are presented to us. Those are the only limitations that we have, as opposed to being born with limitations.
In this living body of Christ that we get to lift up the beautiful words and the painful words of Phillis Wheatley, and they certainly have meaning to us today as we continue to struggle in our society around the issues of racism, equality, white privilege.
What remains the same is oppression. your existence and what you can contribute depends heavily on what the larger society decides. It's not under your control, it's under other people's control.
Oftentimes people will say, well, you belong to Old South, and do people of color go there? And I say, yes, they do. And I said, and you know what? Phillis Wheatley went there too. She was a member, and I think that is something that people don't know.
Black people can be celebrated by those who are not Black. And that's a huge statement. A venerable church like Old South raise her up in terms of her work and her contributions is a huge statement to the larger society.
Well, I think it says to us as a congregation, and particularly to our kids of color, if Phillis can do it, you can do it too.